There we go.
All right, so Brian, you'll see at the bottom there, I was trying to show you the other day when we were doing the Q&A button.
Mhm.
So, I mean, if you see it pop, I'll try and manage those questions into the conversation, so you don't have to worry about them. Every now and then we'll see them in the chat, but for the most part, they'll be in the Q&A, and then I'll manage those. So, sorry, stand up for. I feel like I sit too much.
I'm there with you. I can't tell you. I think I put on 10 pounds when the pandemic started just from not walking around the office.
Right, exactly. Well, that and the 5-pound bag of chips that I decided.
Right, not to mention, exactly, right in the fridge.
It's amazing Costco. It's like, I always tell people the story of, it started and it was like, oh, we had the little snack bag of chips in the house for the kids. And then it's like, well, may as well not buy those because that just seems wasteful for buy a regular bag of chips. And you realize you go through the regular bag of chips pretty quick. And I'm like, well, let me just get the Costco 5-pound bag of chips.
Yeah.
And then I realized I was going through those at the same pace that I was, the snack bag of chips.
That's not good.
No, I had to stop that. But, luckily in the early days, they were sanitized because we were wiping all that crap down.
That's right.
Oh, man.
Then they discovered it didn't matter because the virus is in the air. Perfect.
Right. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, all the stories that our kids will get to tell their kids.
I know, God, can't. I have this vision of the future of 6th grade kids doing whatever, basic history, and the assignment is go home and interview your parents about
COVID.
Exactly. I had to do that for my, to my mom. I remember, I don't remember anything specific that I had to do that for other than it was for a health class, and I had to ask her what her pregnancy with me was like, and what food did she crave, and those kinds of.
So I'm older. I did have to interview my grandparents on the Great Depression.
Really?
Yeah, that was kind of cool. I mean, you realize, because they didn't necessarily talk about it, but you realize just what they went through, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that my grandkids are going to be able to interview anything other than and I'm guessing probably the two biggest things, 9/11 and COVID now.
Well, and hopefully knock on wood, that's,
right,
that's it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So so it'll be interesting. But yeah, so all right. Well, we're hitting 9 o'clock. We'll have let the folks join as they come in, and but go ahead and get started here. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ATARC Cloud and Coffee, the place for discussions on all things modernization and transformation. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks, and my co-host Terry Lee had to step away due to schedule conflicts from the Cloud and Coffee sessions. So really want to say a big thank you to Terry Lee for all her support and efforts over the course of season 2 so far. Before the introductions, the platform is hosted under the Cloud and Infrastructure Mission Area with the goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATARC community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experiences, past and present, executing modernization and transformation efforts. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so please feel free to enter questions in the chat, and I will get to those as we work through the discussion. So now let's move on to the exciting part and introductions. Today our guest is Ryan Korn with the Bureau of Industry and Security with Department of Commerce. Ryan, would you mind giving a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really great to be here. Chris, Kirsten, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited for the discussion today. So I work for the Bureau of Industry and Security, which is one of the smaller bureaus in the Department of Commerce. But we have a really tremendous mission focusing on export control and export administration. So think what's going on in Ukraine right now, China, things that are basically promoting America's national security, foreign policy, technology leadership, and trade and economic interests around the world. So my role is senior cloud architect and product manager. And so essentially what that means is I'm focused on building systems that will enable our agency to continue its modernization journey, to focus on using data as an enterprise asset, and to continue to ensure that our teams who are doing the export administration, export control work have the tools and capabilities that they need to do just an incredible job and meet the moment that the agency finds itself in. Prior to coming to BIS, I've been at BIS for about 6 months now. Actually, it might be to the day, 6 months. Prior to that, I was at the Small Business Administration for 5 years. Started there as a Presidential Management Fellow. Worked in the Office of the Chief Information Officer there as well on a variety of projects, including several COVID support projects, in particular for the Shuttered Venues Operators Grant. That was the money that was going to museums and theaters and Broadway to keep them open, after they experienced, what I've seen in the numbers was like a 99 to 100% revenue loss at the beginning of COVID, especially. It was a pretty nightmarish situation. And also working on a variety of other infrastructure support and data integration and management initiatives to help keep the agency afloat during that time. And prior to that, just, background wise, I was a kindergarten teacher with Teach for America, majored in political science. So I don't really have like a tech background. So I, approach this more from like a learning and development and, how do we all sort of come together to deliver the services that citizens need kind of perspective. And then, of course, I've picked up technical skills along the way, but I'm not, a coder or an engineer, that sort of thing. It's really about helping, like I said, the business units fulfill their mission the best way that they know how.
Well, great. So what you're telling me is if we randomly throw out it's nap time, then we need to take a little bit of a break.
Yeah, in fact, still have that like 2 p.m. lull where I'm like, all right,
need everybody to take a nap. Well, that's awesome. So yeah, you definitely have been part of some great projects, and when we were chatting in the prep, you really kind of talked around something that I think we've kind of covered in different facets on this show over the course of the past 2 years, but it's the managing for results. So can you kind of give me your take on that?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple perspectives on managing for results. At the end of the day, that's what our customers or stakeholders are going to care most about. And so that's the things that we have to pay attention to. I think the most important part with managing for results is defining what success looks and feels like to you, to your team, to your customers, and how does that align to the broader vision that you're trying to bring to the services that you're providing. So making sure that that what you're measuring is sort of fit for the right purpose and that you're not measuring the wrong thing. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need dozens of KPIs or OARs, whatever they're called now.
Right.
I think just having your finger on the pulse for 3 to 5 key metrics that say, okay, where are we now, where are we going, and how do we know that we've been successful? I think that's the most important thing. I'm a huge fan of dashboards, like very, very basic. It doesn't have to be complicated. But again, like that to me helps you understand, okay, here's, what our burn down is looking like. Here's how many laptops we've deployed. Here's what our customer experience score is, whatever it is for the project that you're working on at the time. Just to have that routine check-in, I think is the most important thing.
So do you bring that concept to every project that you work on? Or are there some that don't have that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a mixed bag. It depends on the project. I think for some things, and especially a lot of the work that we're doing at BIS right now, a lot of the projects that we're at, where we're at, we're trying to go from 0 to 1, right? And so it's a pretty binary,
right?
Pretty binary scale. Like, hey, we now have this capability that's in use, and so versus we didn't have this capability before. And so in that situation, you might be looking at more like qualitative kind of things like, hey, we didn't have a community of practice, but we have a community of practice now, and it meets weekly, right? So those are the kind of things that you might look at when you're going from a 0 to 1 kind of situation. I think once that you've level set, then you can say, okay, how do we want to continue to grow and mature? But as I said, it really depends on the project. We've I was working on the Windows 10 deployment when I was at SBA. We're doing a laptop refresh at BIS right now. And in both situations, we had like, okay, we have this many people at these offices who have these like blackout dates, but our target is 100% by this date. And we're just looking at a line just sort of going down like this. And if the line starts to go like that, then it's like, okay, now we know, we need to intervene or, make up for lost time down the road, or can at least communicate that out to people because, things can change. Just that's the nature of the environments that we're in. But I think that's a really great question. I think it depends on the type of project.
Okay, that's yeah, I think very good point. So now let's take it up, I think, to a higher level in kind of a broader sense of transformation. You had labeled it in our discussion previously as the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I don't want to necessarily finish with the ugly, but I think in conversation we can always tie the good back to it. But maybe kind of walk me through some of the good. If an organization is looking to do transformation type initiatives, one of the things was tools, and you kind of had a preference on the kind of the tooling approach.
Yeah, I mean, so starting with tools, in response to that question, I'm a big fan of low code, no code, SaaS, cloud-based, sort of just turnkey approaches. I would say I'm, along the same lines, more on the buy versus build side of that. If it comes down to something that's really, complicated, especially to build. The reason for that is that these things are just a lot simpler to get up and running. Typically other folks have used them before, so you're not venturing into the unknown as much, whether it's in terms of like getting that ATO for your agency and security approval. How do you go about training users? What is the documentation on various vendors' websites? Whereas if you're building something yourself from scratch, that's going to be pretty complicated to communicate out how it's built, how to fix it, especially if you have a changeover in vendor and those sorts of things. If you're using a low code, no code platform, things immediately become more accessible to the user community, especially for power users, because you don't necessarily need to know how to write a line of code in order to use a drag and drop interface. I mean, you need to have some facility with computers and be able to Google things and figure stuff out. But at the end of the day, the complexity is just much, much, much lower. The second thing there as well is that there are so many business processes that need to be surfaced that are just sort of like going on behind the scenes that like maybe one person is doing, and maybe it's super effective, but they just, it's not documented, or it's just sort of becomes a part of the implicit culture rather than like an explicit business process. And by using low code, no code tools, what you can do is say, okay, let's focus on the business process here, and what are the inputs and the outputs, those and the different stages of the process, rather than, oh my God, how do I design the interface? What goes, on the navigation bar? And, how do I do this drop-down menu? Those sorts of questions really are no longer concerns. And that applies not just to application development, but to data management, dashboard development. There's a range of these types of, workflows. There's a range of these types of tools that are proliferating now, for that reason. And the third thing is that from a cost perspective and a speed to delivery perspective, there are just not going to be enough software developers to meet just an unbelievably exploding need globally. Not to mention government, of course, also has difficulty recruiting talent in general. Right. Maybe that'll change a little bit with things being a little bit more remote and flexible with COVID. But if somebody gets an offer from Amazon and they can get hired in 2 weeks, and they get an offer from government and it takes 2 or more months. I know, Chris, we were talking about, you had folks on your team that in some cases was taking like up to 6 months to get them right. cleared and onboarded. You're just not going to have the same flexibility with resources that a private sector company would, somebody that maybe isn't working in government. And so you have this low code, no code tool set that you can empower users to leverage and fill that gap that you might not be getting from a resource perspective.
Yeah, and and you touched on one that I think could be the bad or the ugly, right? Which is the process and the change management side of, yeah, the low code, no code does give you all of those, but if you aren't willing to kind of change some of your processes
Right.
to get there, it does make it a bit of a stretch to an organization to get adoption in, right? And
Yeah.
so that becomes that becomes a real problem. So in the good sense, right?
Yeah.
That one of the things you talked about is kind of the team side of it. So
Mhm.
what how do you see that the team being able to execute is a positive.
Yeah. So I mean, I think obviously tooling is only part of the story, and at the end of the day, probably no more than a 25% influence. Like the biggest thing is going to be the team. I think if you've got a good team, you can execute on just about any approach that makes sense, provided that you have enough time and consistency of leadership. Um, my perspective on things, and maybe this is only me being in the government for 6 years, or for in some really high pressure kind of situations, just in terms of the global impact of things going on, and some of the agencies and programs that I've been in. I have yet to be on a team that wasn't at least great. Like, and I mean that very genuinely. Like, nice people, super, super smart, really clear idea of what they wanted to do, focus on the mission, and like having that be the focus above, like, hey, here's my little thing that I know how to do, so I'm just going to keep doing my thing, even though we need to evolve. Like, of course you have instances of that, but like by and large, the teams that I've been on have just been like just incredibly, just incredible. I mean, just amazing experiences to be a part of, and to watch teams and programs blossom and grow, and these initiatives come to fruition. When I was on Shuttered Venues, for example, at SBA, we had a team of folks that had been brought in to do user acceptance testing and validating the technology that we were using. And they were also sort of the leaders of folks that were approving grants that were going out to the various businesses that had applied for funds. Just an incredible team of people who stepped up in every way imaginable, time, energy, learning new skills, trying new things. And had really, none of them had any technical experience before, right? It's just they were sort of thrown into this crazy situation, and here we were. And on the technical side, that team really stepped up too and said, okay, we really need to provide additional effort to get this over the hump, and get these funds out the door. And so from my perspective, you can do transformation, you can do amazing things with just about any team. I don't think, like I said, there's a team that I've been on that wouldn't have been capable, that hasn't been capable of rising to the occasion. I think the question then comes in terms of, again, the approach. If you're doing low code and nobody knows low code, or maybe you like actually need custom coding because you can't do what you're doing on what you need to do on a low code platform, then obviously that's going to inhibit the team's productivity. If you've got leadership that doesn't have a clear vision, or if you've got leadership that maybe isn't focused on one particular project, they're focused elsewhere, that might also inhibit the team's ability to perform. But from just a purely human capital perspective, I think that there's a tremendous value that every team that I've been on has brought to the table.
So have you bring up a good point, and we've talked about this on here before, and the reskilling. I mean, you obviously don't come from a technical background, but yet you're sitting here, talking to a low code, no code approach to transformation and modernization. I mean, have you been on projects where individuals are not, tied to, the technology, right? Coming from, either legacy, but they want, they're part of the team now, and
Mm-hmm.
that you just getting through kind of that outlier aspect, right? I mean, do you see the need for kind of reskilling for teams to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes and no. I think the biggest thing is probably the mindset that folks are approaching projects with. One of the things that we had talked about previously is that if you're approaching a low code project with the same perspective that you would a high code project, well, then it's probably not ultimately going to work, because the low code platforms have capabilities that are built into them that you don't need to replicate. And if you do replicate, then you're going to be messing with like the underlying operations of the low code platform. So, I do think that the mindset shift is the biggest thing. And I don't know that there's like school for that, right? I think that there or training for that. I think it just becomes the change management approach that leadership bring, that project managers bring to the teams that they're working it with, and the offices that they're leading, and the projects that they're on. Now, having said that, if you say, okay, we're going with XYZ platform, and whether that's an executive decision or whether that's approved by like a series of review boards, there's always going to be a growth and evolution in technology, and particularly now as data and development become more democratized through these kinds of platforms. But I think at the end of the day, people learn best when they're learning on the job, and when they've got like a supportive community of folks around them. This is harkening back to my teacher days, but I remember reading an article at one point that said like 90% of teacher professional development efforts are never actually implemented in the classroom. And the reason is that, it might be a wonderful session, and often they are, districts pay good money for professionals to come in and train teachers on certain approaches. But if there isn't that follow through, if there isn't that sort of, if there aren't like materials that are provided that they can then implement with their students, and you sort of left it to the teachers to figure it out on their own, then there's no way you're going to have the same kind of impact. So I bring that up in this example to say that like on the job training and working on real problems is key. And that's the only way that I've really been able to come up. I've never really taken a technology course other than like a Scrum Master type of class and that sort of thing. And so, I think when we think about reskilling, it's that mindset shift, and then it's opportunities for on-the-job training and follow through, and maybe some of those, training opportunities peppered in, and certainly encouraging people to pursue their interests and passions and things that they're excited about within the platforms that you're now going to leverage as an office or as an agency. But and I think probably putting together like individual development plans is a really good tool to help people with their own career growth and development, and that's going to be a part of any really strong professionals day-to-day part of their career. But ultimately, I think I don't know that looking at this from like a traditional you were working in like a coal mine, and now the coal mine is shut down, and so you're going to become like a plumber or something like that. I don't know that we need to look at it from that type of traditional kind of approach.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, and I think that kind of leads into some of the conversation around the bad, right? I think the concept of thinking and the change management, right? That I think your comment was, shaping the direction and old thinking with new tech, right? So maybe kind of, I think you were starting to touch on that a little bit, but that is a challenge, right? I mean, that does inhibit really kind of that evolution. So can you kind of dive into a little bit of of the starting the bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things to look out for. And if you are reading the documentation of some of these platforms, if you're working with your team and coaching folks and also managing for results, you can very clearly say just objectively, hey, look, we wanted result A, we're getting result B, and let's assess why that might be, right? Like it becomes obvious and sort of depersonalized. And I think that's really important, actually, is the depersonalization. Like some of this stuff is just nobody's fault, right? Like it's very rare that you have somebody out there who's just being totally malicious or, completely uninformed. That's less often the case so much as like, hey, we just sort of ended up in a situation because we didn't know something, and now we figured that out. And I very frequently tell people on the teams that I'm on, like, I'm only like a year ahead of you. Like, I don't have some special skill set. Like, I've just been doing this, on this particular platform with this particular mindset a little bit longer, right? And in fact, because you have the technical skills, you're going to exceed me in no time, right? So that's where that community aspect, and I think the coaching comes in, and like having the stories of people who have been there before is really important. But I think like I said, I think if you depersonalize it, then you can move on from the bad to whatever the situation, to rectify the situation. So just to give you an example, we had a situation where we're modernizing an old application. Database was built in a certain way 25 years ago. I couldn't tell you whether that was good or bad at the time, but it was at least of the time, right? The tools that we're using now have a lot of built-in capabilities. We don't need, as many tables for a lot of different things. The relationships are different, and this is to say nothing of like looking at what the new business process should be, just from a pure technical standpoint. If you're trying to just rebuild that old database on a new platform that already has a lot of these capabilities built in, that's going to lead to a bad outcome, because then the capability is not going to work as designed, right? But again, if this is something that you're able to, just as an example, analyze, discuss, coach, say, hey, look, we tried this approach, it didn't work, let's try another approach, and having that, having that opportunity to lower the risk in the discussion for everybody, I think that really goes a long way to shifting from the bad to the good again, because things are going to go up and things are going to go down. We're going to learn and discover, and in part, that's the journey along the way of becoming reskilled, I think, as you were mentioning previously.
Right. So that we got a couple of questions in here. What does an excellent cloud architect look like?
That's a great question. Still trying to figure that out. I like to believe that my leadership saw something in me when they brought me over. The way that I look at it, and sort of my skill set in general, whether that was in technology, in sort of political science and government kind of thinking, or when I was teaching, is how do I build systems? And it doesn't really matter what the system is, whether it's technology A, for this purpose, communicating with technology B for this purpose, or whether it's I need to figure out how to teach the letters to this 5-year-old, right? Like, I think if you develop a system and you can routinely implement that system, and get everybody comfortable with using that system, you're going to be successful. I think it's a really tough question. Honestly, I have to say probably trial and error is going to be part of that as well. And that being the case, provide opportunities to fail for yourself and for the team that you're on. Of course, you want to be ambitious. I think that's important as well, but not unreasonably so. That's something that my team has informed me of a few times. That one of the teams that I've been working with lately, and I think that that's healthy to have that communication. It's probably another aspect of it too. And I think probably also recognition that these things are always going to continuously evolve. Like, you want to have a clear plan. You want to say, look, here's what our broader business objectives are. These platforms accomplish this objective. We're going to have them communicate in this way, using this design methodology. And then we're just going to keep up with that as things evolve, as needs evolve, as we discover things don't work, or we don't know how to do something. I think and then the last thing I'll say too, because I don't have obviously prepared statement on this. I think there's a bit of an entrepreneurial aspect to this as well. My degree is in social entrepreneurship, and I tried to start a business at one point. It was just a horrible failure, but from that I learned that so let's gloss over that. But from that I learned that nobody really has the answers to a lot of things. There's just maybe a lot of good ideas out there, and there's a lot of bad ideas out there. And the more that you can bring in diverse perspectives, vendors' perspectives, contractors' perspectives, other agencies who have done similar things, perspectives, within your network, to weigh in on some of those ideas and say, hey, this is how we did it. I think that too is an important skill that can then be replicated wherever you work, and then built on from there. And I think finding the giants to stand on, whose shoulders you can stand on, is an important skill.
Yeah, I would say that, and this kind of lends itself to the next part of that question, the difference between an architect and a cloud engineer. But I do think that one of the things that an architect, one of the differences that I see is that lesson learned from failure, right? That the ability to, having tried and failed numerous times, and then being able to communicate that is a key. And that would be one key difference that I would see between kind of the architect and engineer. But I will ask that question of you, the difference between an architect and an engineer.
Yeah, you know, the way that I see it is that there's a lot of overlap between a lot of different skill sets in that respect. Um, the way that I look at it, and this is just a new development for me, being in sort of a dual role like that with architect and product manager in my title, is that the architect is the designer and the engineer is the builder. But it depends on the organization that you're in. You know, in many cases, especially if you've got somebody who's like a really strong technical architect, um, they're going to be doing some engineering work as well. They're going to be coaching their mid and junior engineers too. You know, in my case, again, trying to design some of the systems to the extent that I'm able to, macro level. But then you've got a whole bunch of other sort of other architects and engineers that are doing some of the more technical designs that are just not in my skill set. You know, I couldn't tell you how to make server A communicate with server B over XYZ protocol or port.
Right.
That is not something that I know. But the folks that I've been working with are just absolute wizards at that. And, you know, all of a sudden these things are talking and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. You know, and so I think that that's probably a good delineation, is the maybe looking at it from a skills perspective more than a like this person does this and this person does that kind of thing. And then how much time are they spending balancing those skills? I think one thing that I've come to appreciate lately is the importance of architecture. That was not really, I mean, I was doing some of that design work, but that wasn't like a core facet of my role previously before coming to BIS. And now I actually find myself realizing, oh, I'm actually spending too much time on the product management side. I really need to get back to some of the architecture work to help define that go forward vision along with the rest of the team. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah, if
Yeah,
I
I think that
boil it
was.
down, I would say design and building.
No, that's perfect. So let's tie this back then to, you brought up the product management. You know, one of the things that we've talked about, and which I think also ties to the kind of the architect aspect of things, is back to kind of the tooling, right? And that bad, it's you know, the tool for purpose, right? So
Mhm.
maybe let's kind of dive into that aspect of it.
Yeah, you know, I think the biggest thing for me is a lot of these platforms can do a lot of things these days, right? And so it's not so much a question of like which vendor do you want to go with or which technology solution is better than the other. You know, many of these things have parity at this point. I think the question, or close to it, or will, you know, within a very short amount of time. I think the question is, um, what are the capabilities that you want to leverage of each of these platforms, and is there a reason for doing that? And probably cost and, you know, skill set of your team and preference of your team and the business owners is something that should be taken into account in that decision making process as well. But I think that you know, that fit for purpose is going to be the biggest thing. And for that, I think you need to define what your purpose is, right? Like, if your goal is just to go to the cloud, well, you can do that on any platform. You should probably just make the decision based on, like I said, you know, cost, what, you know, technologies your team is familiar with, you know, those types of sort of technical factors. If you have like a very specific use case of the way that you want to do data modernization, data management, you know, that's a burgeoning field right now. You might say, oh, you know what, do a comparative analysis and say, this product has these 10 features, but this product only has 7. Well, we're going to go with this product, and we're going to invest our time into learning that skill set. I think the biggest thing for me, and this is coming from the perspective of a small agency, and I've heard perfectly valid opinions from folks at larger places, and that is I like to use as few tools as possible, because you just want to get good at doing one thing, right? And then you can get good at doing a second thing and a third thing. But as soon as you try and do 10 things, all of a sudden you're overwhelmed, you're splitting your resources, and that's not helpful. So the way that I look at it is starting small and then expanding from there, as you realize that you need to fill gaps in your core platform. That's, I would say, generally the approach that I've taken that's been successful.
Okay, so when we touched on this earlier,
Mhm.
you know, the tool is, again, the low code, no code um, brings a core boxed capability, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
can, you know, you have the ability to customize a little bit typically, but you know, let's get into this is, you know, I think a part that that I see as probably the biggest technology problem, and it's the change management side, right? So
Yeah.
the process, right? So you bring something that could do the the work that it's meant to do into an environment, but that environment is used to going from step A to step B to step C, et cetera.
Mhm.
And this is taking out, it's going, step A to step D to, but not everybody is ready to do it that way.
Right.
So how do you work in tandem, that low code, no code, tooling for the, right tool for the right purpose before you get to the gap? How do you do that in
Yeah.
tandem to get there?
That's such a great question. At the end of the day, you can't turn off your what's working, right? Until you have something that's at least as good or better functional. And I think that's something that's sometimes forgotten in the move to cloud or move using new tools, is that you've got production systems that function for at least your core business mission. And again, you can't change from that until you've got something else that's ready for prime time. So there's a couple different schools of thought on this. I think that from my perspective, the thing that's really worked the best is a combination of pilots and setting up. There's a technical term that's been used in like business books. I want to say it's like an innovation network, essentially. And so the idea there is that you say, okay, with the pilot perspective, we're going to just try a lot of things and learn how to do this, right? Both from a technical perspective, as well as from like a governance and change management perspective. And just one that'll attract some early adopters, that'll attract the innovators, people who are super interested in that stuff. And so you'll build this sort of core base of people who are interested in using the new capabilities of these new platforms and spreading them throughout the organization. So that's where that pilot approach comes in, small use cases where people can learn from, where we can fail and the consequences are pretty minimal because it's not affecting your core operations quite yet. And you're bringing in that initial group of advocates who are going to be really excited for what you're trying to bring to the table. The second component of that is standing up essentially this innovation network. There's a great article by John Cotter on this, where basically you've got your core hierarchy of your typical business processes and business management, and then just as you described, Chris, that goes from A to B to C to D, and it's very structured and clear. The innovation network is sort of all over the place with different nodes communicating with different stakeholders for different reasons, different purposes. And so the way that you spin that sort of thing up is by building on that pilot approach that you've started initially. So pilot 1 eventually leads to pilot 2, which leads to pilot 3, and then pilot 3 gets implemented, and that's great. And so now you have something in production, then you've got pilot 4 and pilot 5. At a certain point, you're getting more and more people involved. That innovation network is growing. People are becoming more comfortable with the approach. And as you build advocates, you're also building the platform at the same time, and you're also building that comfort level for people with it as well, both again in terms of technical skills as well as just the general idea that, hey, this is a new thing and we don't have to be afraid of the new thing. Now, so you have the pilots, you've got this innovation network. Once that is matured, that's when you start really looking at saying, okay, we've got this core business process, that mission failure will result if we don't have this right. Now we're ready to build it on this platform because we've got the cultural support within the organization, as well as the technical chops, because we've been building on this for so long. And then at that point, it just becomes a thing about consistency of leadership, consistency of vision to see it through. Because at a certain point, that innovation network, once you've built these core business processes out, that will become the new formal business structure, essentially. And then from there, who knows? Then we're all going to be in the metaverse, as one of my colleagues said recently, and the same approach will happen with the next set of new technologies that are coming into the government.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions. There's two, one in the chat, one in the Q&A, but I'm gonna hit it from a leadership perspective. What is your recommendation to project teams that are afraid of low code, no code based deployments? And the comment in the chat is tied to you may say low code, no code, but however, technical team better know how to code. So I think in that sense, there is the low code, no code moniker is not, you download it and off you go, right?
Correct. Exactly. Yeah, no, and I wouldn't say that you're excluding, right, like a coding skill set. I mean, there are a variety of use cases where that's still going to be absolutely necessary, even within the platforms themselves, right? Like, a lot of these platforms leverage JavaScript libraries for some of their more advanced configurations. So if you don't have somebody on your team that knows JavaScript, is it low code because you're only using some like code snippets and you don't have to build out the entire code base? Sure. But if you need that capability and somebody on your team doesn't know JavaScript really, really well, and in particular the platform's implementation of JavaScript, because they're all going to be slightly different, then yeah, you're absolutely going to have a problem. So I think it's you want that, in my mind, you want that to be the foundation, but coding skills aren't going away. It's just how do you maximize the resources that you have where coding is not required.
Right.
And to the question of teams being afraid, I think that's where courageous leadership comes in. I think that's where finding your advocates comes in. There's always going to be somebody who's willing to try something. I think in some cases that's where you set aside funding and say, hey, look, we're going to do a contract competition, small pilot for X technology, right? You can also bring in speakers from other agencies to say, hey, here's how we did it, and here's the benefits that provided for us. And I think the other thing too is listening to what your team has to say and really validating that perspective, because emotions aren't wrong, right? They just sort of are, and that's information that is being provided to you that is maybe indicative of some other feelings and concerns that are totally legitimate and need to come out. Like, for example, hey, you want to implement this new low code platform. Well, you're very excited about this. It makes me feel like you want to do this tomorrow. And this is a system that we built up over 15 years. So how do you anticipate getting this 15 years worth of development done in, tomorrow, essentially? And that's a legitimate conversation that needs to be had. Can you do it faster using low code, no code platforms? Absolutely. But that fear is driven by the fact that people don't want to lose the core business operations that have been, hard fought in many cases. So, I think there's a variety of approaches, whether it's, like I said, pilots, contract competitions, finding your advocates, and having those, difficult conversations that will open up the space to give way to change. And there's also this thinking too. The authors are escaping me, but the book is called Crossing the Chasm, and like essentially the idea is, you're not going to win everybody all at once, whether it's on your team or your customers, whomever. But the key number there is like 15% of both like those 2 to 5% upfront innovators of the bell curve, and then that sort of next tranche of 10 to 12% of folks who are the early adopters. Once you've got that core base, things will start to unfold. And that doesn't mean that you don't need to continue doing those difficult conversations, pilots, those sorts of things. But I think that, as things pick up steam, like those are the kind of things that both build and maintain momentum for these kinds of initiatives. But yeah, I think the conversations part of that is going to be essential as well.
Yeah. No, and I think the communication is key in any of these, right? I mean, anytime you're going to make a change or a new development, communication is key, and we'll get into that here in a second. So we got one more question that came in. Given the seemingly increasing number of 0 days and application vulnerabilities, what are your thoughts on how to implement a good AppSec strategy to secure the applications?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. There are a variety of things that you can do. One of the things that's most important is, depending on low code, no code, how far down that path you're going. Web application firewalls are certainly going to be key. Having a zero trust architecture is also going to be essential. I think it's really important to have audit logs. And I mean, obviously we know it's important to have audit logs and understanding of when accounts were created and who's got what access, those sorts of things. So that but I think what's even more important is surfacing those in some kind of dashboard or reporting that's easily discoverable, or alerting system where you can say, hey, wait a minute, something is not right. I think obviously you want to have code scanning involved in whatever your pipeline is, whether it's low code or traditional development. And the other thing too is to continue to work with your security team to make sure that you're getting their perspective. It's a hand-in-hand type of approach. It shouldn't just be about compliance. But I would say that zero trust sort of software-defined architecture is going to be really essential, because then you just focus, but focusing primarily on the identities that you're dealing with and the accounts that you're dealing with, rather than worried about somebody sort of completely exploiting your system because you didn't know, because they have access to your entire network, or they found one vulnerability somewhere that just sort of opens up the floodgates.
Yeah, and I do think it's a good question from the perspective of, you do need to, no matter what you're doing, it does need to be part of part of the thought process, part of your planning, right? The security aspect of it, whether it is low code, no code, whether it's new development, right? And a lot of times, if it's again, the out of the box kind of concept, you're like, oh, it's it's the what was it, the Prego or the Ragu, right? It's in there, right?
Right.
But it is a key aspect of that development process, that planning process, and then again the team building process, right? To make sure that, okay, we've got these gates, you got to go through and make sure it's tested and validated against whatever we said we were going to do. And I think that is a big part, and not trying to rush through to kind of skip that.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the benefits of using these platforms too, because again, as Chris is saying, like, vendors will take care of a lot of that for you. You're inheriting their controls that have been validated by third parties, FedRAMP, what have you. So if there's a 0-day, the vendor is going to be taking care of it. When Neo4j happened a couple of weeks ago, that was not really a concern for our new platforms, because it's just totally abstracted from us, right? That's part of the service that the vendor provides. Alternatively, on-prem, everybody was scrambling to try and figure out what applications we had on-prem that were leveraging that library. And so, like, there's a lot of security that's built in that you don't have to worry about as much, because the vendor takes care of that. Of course, then you do want to layer on those additional capabilities, like I said, firewalls, zero trust, to the degree that you're able to implement that. But ultimately, there's a benefit there to having a vendor responsible for these things versus one individual organization that may not have the resources or expertise to do so.
Yeah. So let's kind of lead into some of the next topics. We've got about 15 minutes here. Leadership. We talked a little bit about about this, and this is definitely a good, and it could be an ugly, right? I mean, the leadership involvement. So we talk about that a lot on these podcasts, but from a project development standpoint, from the technology evolution perspective, give a little bit of your perspective on leadership involvement.
Yeah, I've been really lucky to have been a part of some really wonderful teams with a lot of great leaders, and also be a part of organizations that had some wonderful leaders throughout the organization who could advocate for new technology, new approaches, those sorts of things. I think that is absolutely essential. I think everything comes down to the leaders, to leadership. What is their vision? How are they spending their money? Who are the folks that they're bringing in to support that vision? That sort of thing. So, from my perspective, that is probably the single most important factor in any of this, beyond the platform, beyond the approach that's being taken. I also think that, I think of it a lot of just like, I have this very clear vision in my mind of like a football metaphor where your leaders are your offensive line. And they're making it so that you could just run it through into the end zone, right? And so then, of course, it becomes your responsibility to do the best that you can to run your football into the end zone. But the leadership are the ones that are making that possible, because otherwise you're going to get sacked right off the bat. So that's how I see the leaders that I work with, that I've really resonated with and felt like are making the work that we're doing possible. That's how I see them approaching their day-to-day. Communicating with staff, communicating with their peers to make it clear what the vision is, advocating for their staff so that people aren't, especially in IT, I think everybody just blames IT for a lot of issues. Well, sometimes it's user error. And so you want to have leaders that are standing up for you and saying, no, my guys know what they're doing. Here's the situation that we're actually in. How can we find a resolution together? Those are the kind of things that you want to find in a leader, that clear vision, that advocacy, that communication.
Yeah, because it provides that consistency, right? I mean, it gives confidence to folks that might need that that little bit of a push or a suggestion to change that. Hey, this is where they're heading, right? This is we need to kind of support that, which then becomes kind of I know we've talked about the adoption, right? So how do you get to the adoption side, because that can be pretty brutal, right? So the plans laid out may not may get stopped dead in their tracks at times if you can't get people to adopt where you're heading.
Exactly. I mean, it's your point of consistency. I think that's the most important thing. Because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of platforms nowadays, especially, the major cloud providers, there's parity, with most of the capabilities that they're providing. And so, if you select AWS, for example, right? Well, that's great. Go use AWS. But if all of a sudden the leader says, well, we want to use Azure instead, or we want to use Google instead, or whatever the provider is, then you have yourself in a situation where everything is good, but if we had just stuck with what the original plan was, it would have gotten so much farther into development, into the change management, into the stage of actually becoming more institutionalized part of the business, because we stuck with it, whatever the it thing is. There's a lot of good ideas out there, a lot of good platforms, and I think that the responsibility of a leader is to say, okay, here's how we're going to stay, here's how and when we're going to stay the course, and here is when we're going to change course if we see things aren't working. But it can't just be a willy-nilly kind of thing. Otherwise, you're not going to get that full, you're never going to reach the full benefits of the capability that you're pursuing in the first place, no matter how functional the platform or tools that you're using are. So I think that consistency is just incredibly important for that alone. Unless, again, things can change. But a lot of these core fundamentals don't, unless the leader changes. If you're sticking with your core fundamentals and you've got that leader that's continuously advocating for you and continuously supporting the team and helping the team develop and grow so that they can grow and develop the technology, it's going to work out. At that point, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. So want to hit two more topics. We've got about 10 minutes left to finish out kind of the, again, I think we took it from a positive side, but the ugly, right? If some of these last couple of topics don't go well, it could get pretty ugly in an organization. The last one that I think is, a struggle in any change management situation is that outlier, right? So how from your experience, get that outlier that, may just be, we've talked about it on here before, server hugging, or just, absolutely resistant to change. That can create a real, a real bump in the progression life cycle. How do you get the outlier engaged?
Yeah, I think there's a couple approaches. Approach number one is don't start with that person, right? This goes back, or that office, or whatever it is, right? This goes back to that pilot approach. You want to plant your seeds where the ground is fertile, not where it's already been salted, right? So that's the first thing, right? Because you're never going to prove the viability of something with somebody who's not ready for it, right? So that's the most important thing, is getting your house in order, with these pilots, with this innovation network, building that base of support and proving out the capabilities that you're trying to bring to the table, and then being able to demonstrate those for the wider group. And that effort will continue you to win advocates. That doesn't mean that you cut off that person or you say, I'm going to ignore them. That's the worst thing that you can do, because that person is always then going to badmouth you, or they're going to continue to harden their resistance and their defensiveness. That's just sort of like the natural reaction to the way things go. At that point, it's about having that continuous conversation, continuous engagement, and not with the intention of winning or persuading, but with the intention of hearing out the concerns of the other person. And that's what I'd say is the other component of this approach is people are reasonable, right? There's a reason why people are feeling the emotions that they're feeling. There's a reason why they're taking the actions that they're taking. And understanding that is going to do two things. One, it's going to demonstrate you have respect for that person who more likely than not has been successful in other things and is probably holding on to their existing approach in part for that reason. But that sort of just validation of their approach is gonna soften the resistance that they might have. And I think that the other component of it too is it's only going to strengthen your implementation of whatever the technology or platform is that you're implementing, because you're going to unearth some legitimate concern there, even if it's not something that you thought of or something that you think is super important. It is really important to that person. And maybe there's someone else who has that same concern, but they're not as resistant. Well, now you're going to help that other person. Right. So there is a bit of a journey perspective to this, and like giving people their space and time, but just keeping the door open. I think so I would just describe as like one, approach number one, start with your pilots, innovation network, fertile ground, that sort of thing. Approach number two, continuous engagement and validation and understanding and empathy. Again, not with the intention to persuade or win over, right? Just to understand and to focus on what is the collective win there that we can have together, right? And then the third element of that, I would say, is to build in processes and governance approaches that respect their way of doing business, whether they end up coming with you or not, right? Because if you treat somebody as a roadblock for you, they are going to end up being a roadblock for you. And that's not good for anybody. It's certainly not going to be good for your individual success. Is you need to frame the way that you're defining success in that regard. And so if you're looking at like I said, if you're looking at somebody as a roadblock, they're going to become a roadblock. That's really not what you want to do. Instead, you want to say, okay, look, my success is not going to be dependent on this person, or our organization's success is not going to be dependent on this person. We want to work together to the extent possible. How can we build a governance structure that does that, right? So that ties into this, managing for results piece that we talked about earlier. If we can say, hey, look, here's how our systems are performing, here's how your systems are performing, that depersonalizes things, and maybe their stuff is performing great, and it's not a priority for the organization to move ahead at that time. That's fine. Like you don't have to win that situation. Or maybe it reveals some insights that both of you had never realized before. That's great too. That's healthy for the organization to move ahead. And then there are also processes that can be put in place that, maybe something is happening within the context of the broader technology of the organization, but that doesn't mean that they and many other stakeholders wouldn't have all kinds of autonomy to run their systems the way that they see fit. And this is particularly important in larger organizations where you're going to naturally have a whole bunch of different technologies in play, because there's so many different use cases, compared to a smaller agency like BIS. So I think by those approaches, sort of your pilot and innovation network, your continuous communication, engagement, empathy, conversations, those sorts of things, and then redefining success and building your governance and processes around that, like that's what's going to get you to the highest level of penetration and success that you can achieve, given the underlying dynamics and culture of an organization. I think especially those last 2 points, super important, right. Because at the end of the day, people are, like I said, reasonable and are going to do what they're going to do for the reasons that they see fit. And respecting their autonomy, paradoxically, is in the long run what's more likely going to lead to that kind of collaboration and support for what you're trying to do in the long run. So that's what I would recommend in that type of scenario. It's not about winning. It's about working with that person in the situation.
Excellent point. So the last for our last 4 minutes, you touched on it a little bit earlier. innovation network.
Mhm.
Can you explain innovation network and how that might benefit an organization?
Yeah. So again, the way that an innovation network would work is that it's sort of that informal operational processes that are in gestation, right? That are not, excuse me, conforming to the traditional hierarchy, that don't necessarily have core business processes a part of them yet. It's that informal relationships between people, using of new technologies, trying out new things, experimenting. That's essentially what that innovation network would consist of. I can look up the article and send it your way also, just to, it gives like it's like a 15-page sort of description of how things would operate. From my perspective, there's a couple core fundamentals to that. One is sort of acknowledging that that's the approach that you're taking, so that you can explicitly define the strategy for yourself, for leadership, for your team, that sort of thing. The second is this pilot-driven approach, where you've put a whole bunch of tools out there and are allowing people to experiment and use the tools the way that they see fit. At that stage, governance is fairly light, because you don't have that hierarchy, and because you're just trying to get the tools out there in the first place and understand how people are going to be using them. And then the last component of that is building a very light wrapper around that, typically in terms of like a community of practice, or you might stand up a Teams or a Slack channel devoted to this, where people can communicate back and forth, where you've got these sort of regular check-ins and are building the capability of both the platform and your team over time. So I wouldn't consider it to be like a formal structure. It's really just an approach that's taken in order to help new ways of doing business get a foothold, so that they can mature to the point where they're ready to assume core business processes from the traditional hierarchy. So that's typically the way that would work. But I'm happy to track down that article and send it your way, so we can you can read about it further.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. That'd be great. So we're coming to the end. Really, I guess I mentioned to you in our prep that an hour will almost not feel like enough time. I feel like you and I could continue to chat. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today on the Cloud and Coffee. And for those in the audience, thank you very much. And this will be posted on ATARC's YouTube channel, so you can catch this later as well. If anybody is interested in kind of learning, there are ATARC mission groups and working groups that folks can get involved in, that we're trying to solve some of the problems that were talked about today. So Ryan, thank you very much. And Kirsten, I'll let you snap a quick picture and wrap things up.
Sounds good. All right. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Got it.
Ryan, thank you again. Everyone that attended, thank you for attending, and looking forward to the next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Okay, bye.
Take care.